There we are. We are live. Welcome to Coffee and Conversations on the Intimacy of Race. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having an amazing morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're tuning in from. And I'm really excited today because my guest is Rachel Ngom. And now Rachel has a very, very, very interesting background, and that's one of the reasons why I brought her on to speak with us. So I'm just going to read her bio a little bit, and then we're going to jump right into it. And so if you're joining us live or on the replay, say hello, and where you're tuning in from, and please leave some feedback on what ahas or eye-opening awarenesses that you may have gotten from having these intimate conversations about race. Now, Rachel is the host of She's Making an Impact podcast. She is a business and lead generation expert, helping purpose-driven female entrepreneurs drive more traffic, leads, and sales through Pinterest, blogging, and strategic use of automation. So here's the really cool part. Rachel has lived in Kenya and met her husband in Senegal, got married in Morocco, and spent 2 years in France. So I would love to have a conversation with Rachel about her experience being in an interracial relationship, living in Africa, and really how she's taking a stand and taking in her business on racial justice and equality. So welcome, Rachel. So nice to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I'm really excited. And, you know, I appreciate the time that you have taken to be with us today, because I know you have your little girl with you, and your husband's just back from being away for a couple of months. So really appreciate your time. So tell us a little bit about you and your background and kind of like where you grew up, so that we can really move into this this marriage to someone from Africa and maybe the effects that may have had on your family.
Yeah, so I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. So it wasn't very diverse by any means. Like, we had a few Black people at our school, and some like Hispanic people, but it was predominantly like white suburbs. My mom actually tells me one of the first dolls that I picked was a black doll. And like, I went to the store and I just picked it. I don't know. She was like, I want just you do you. I was like, all right, cool. And it was when I went to college that I became a Christian and God told me to go to Africa. And I was like, all right, I don't really know anyone there, but ended up figuring it out and got an internship, moved to Kenya. That was completely life transforming, and we can definitely talk about that. When baby wants mama, we're going to bring baby on board. Yay!
Little baby gets to come on camera. What's your name?
Gabrielle.
Gabrielle. Hi,
Yeah.
sweet boo. All right, I'll try not to get distracted and go into complete baby talk.
I love it. Yeah. So I lived in Kenya, got my master's. Well, no, lived in Kenya, came back, finished college, and then I made a list of all the characteristics I wanted in my future husband. And one of the characteristics was he should not be American. So I like right off the bat wanted somebody completely different than me. I wanted him to speak another language in addition to English. So I'm like, he should speak French or Spanish, be taller than me. I'm 6'1", and be a Christian. And so when I moved to Senegal and I met my husband, it was like that night, I was like, he exists. Oh my gosh, like he exists. It's just crazy, because he was like, we actually met at a club, which is kind of funny. But he was wearing a cross in a predominantly Muslim country. He was taller than me, and he ended up speaking English, which no one in Senegal really speaks English. It's pretty rare. So I was like, oh my gosh, he exists. And we were engaged a couple months after that. We've been married for 10 years, and I adore him. So it was after.
Wait, I have a quick question.
Yes.
How tall is he?
He's 6'2", so he's barely taller than me. Okay. Barely, but it counts. Totally counts. So then I came back and got my master's in social work. And in between going to college and grad school, I was working with the resettlement of African refugees. And so something about Africa and the people in Africa has just called my heart. And I always feel more comfortable. Like, it's so funny that when I was in college, I was hanging out with 40-year-old men from the Congo, and they would like come over and we'd go salsa dancing together. And I just always felt really comfortable. And those were my friends. And that was like one of my big things. I worked at an African resettlement, refugee resettlement agency, and got my master's in social work. And the whole plan was basically to continue working in social work and either within Africa, work for the UN, or work with African refugees. Like, that was the plan until I couldn't find a job with that master's when we moved to Florida. And that's when I started my business, which ended up being a huge blessing in disguise, because now we can actually move to Africa and support ourselves and do businesses and nonprofit work and all that stuff. So we're actually, bless you, we're planning on moving to Senegal next year sometime, probably like late spring, early summer.
I think when I met you, you were living in France.
Yes, we were living in France.
Mm-hmm. You were living in France, exactly.
Yep.
So, let's talk about what your family thinks about this, because you just said you grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, white schools. I'm assuming your parents are white too. Yes. And there's no interracial mix in that. Mm-hmm. What did they think about your affinity towards Africa and not only the country and the people, but bringing a African man into the family and knowing that you would have mixed race children who are going to face their own set of challenges?
I never ever felt that it was an issue. It was when I came back from Senegal and I told them I was engaged. They were like, to who? To who? We need to meet this man. And so it was just like, they wanted to meet him and meet his family. And they never made me feel like weird about, or I never even thought that they thought anything differently. Because I never thought about it. I never saw my husband as like a black man. I saw him as the man I love. Right. Yeah. And so they saw him as the man my daughter loves. And they just wanted to make sure, they wanted me to make sure I was picking the right person. But for them, if they did feel anything, I never felt it. My parents are amazing. They've always been really supportive.
Yeah, well, obviously, because look at their daughter. You can tell that they're amazing. Has it caused any uncomfortableness among other family members or friends? Or, have you ever, I used to say this about myself. I was really, really naive as a kid because my parents I grew up in the 60s, probably like your parents. And, but my parents went out of their way to shield me from the ugliness of racism. I'll say it that way. And so we had they had friends who were African American who had adopted a white child, a white daughter, and she was my age, and we played together. I never knew she was adopted. I literally thought that you could just come out any color.
And I love that.
And I would get in fights with my friends on the schoolyard, like, no, she just came out that way. Because they subsequently had other children who were black. I think, she may have had some infertility issues in the beginning. And I just literally would have died by the statement that she just came out white. And that's how much my parents kind of kept me in a little bit of an innocent bubble, which, on the one hand, God bless them. But on the other hand, it really, could have gotten me killed for being so naive. And it sounds like, your parents were similar to where they didn't really make an issue of differences in a negative way, but more of kind of, it is what it is. And
it's always been like, we love everybody.
Yeah.
Like, we treat everyone with love and respect. It doesn't matter who they are, what they're about. We're always going to show up and love people. And we're getting another child in. It's big, bro.
That's amazing children. So he wants to play with his sister.
He does, but we need supervision for that. So why don't you just leave her with me? Okay, I'll hold her while you go over there, though, buddy. Oh, his new thing is getting to hold his sister, which is kind of a big deal.
How old is he? He's tall.
He's 7.
Okay. Big boy. You got real
Yes.
help, mama. Good for
I do
you.
have help. I am lucky. He's a good helper.
Good for you.
Yeah, you can say hi.
So let me ask you about, oh,
Hello.
Okay.
hello.
Now you're good. All right, go ahead.
So what was the experience for you living in Kenya as a white woman?
It's so interesting. Here, I'm just going to take her. Hey, let me take her. So that way I'm not distracted, okay? It's so funny because as we were jumping on, you were telling me how when you were, I think in Germany or with your husband's relatives, that, yep, how they were like touching your hair and how you felt different.
Touching hair is taboo, as I'm sure you know, with a Black woman, but they would ask questions and they were very curious about it. Yes.
Because that was my experience as being a white person in Kenya. People were just curious. And so they would want to touch my hair. They would like come up and look at my skin because I was in an area. Yes, you can touch my hair. I was in an area where I was probably one of the only white people maybe that they've ever seen. So I was very much really I was very much in like rural Kenya. And so it was, this person is new. I've never seen someone who looks like this. Can I touch your hair? Can I touch your skin? And they did call.
Sorry.
On va faire neuf. Assieds-toi. Okay. It was, they also called me Mzungu, which means white person. And so it was when I would walk, I remember when I walked out of the hospital compound, I just felt when I first got there that all eyes were on me, like everywhere that I would go. And so it was definitely a different feeling after like growing up where I grew up in the suburbs and going to the University of Illinois, because I've never been like so different. Yeah, I've never been the different one ever. And so
that's really interesting because being looked at, I mean, as a different one, I have a couple of questions about that.
Yeah.
You know, did it make you, well, how did it make you feel being different?
At first, I didn't like all the attention. And so I remember I would leave the hospital compound where I was living and I like having everyone staring at me. I would like literally, I turned around and went back to my room and I was like, I can't do this. Oh my gosh. And that's when my relationship with God got so strong. Cause I remember just going and praying, Ephesians, the end of Ephesians, where it talks about the armor of God. And I would just like pray that I had the armor of God, and I got more comfortable as time went on. And then it just became normal because I lived there. So it was like, I didn't mind the attention. I know some people are like, I don't want to be different. I like it just became my new normal. And so if people came up to me, they were curious, and sometimes they asked me for money. So it would be Mzungu, give me money, which is understandable given the education that they have about white people, right? But a lot of times they were just curious and wanted to get to know me and where I'm from. And so I ended up building some really cool relationships with like my coworkers that I was living with. I ended up making them cheeseburgers and pizza. They've never had cheese before. So like that's how rural we were. Like they've never had cheeseburgers before. They've never had pizza before. So it was really cool to be able to share a little bit of like my culture with them. And they of course shared like ugali and sukuma wiki and chapati with me. And so just being able to like bridge those cultural gaps, that's something that I love, and getting to know them better. They got to know me better. And it ended up just being an incredible experience. And that's like why I'm so excited to go back. Because you get to know so many different people and how people live all around the world. And it's so different. And it's a lot of fun too.
So what kind of work were you doing while you were there?
Nonprofit. So we were working in Kenya. It was with an organization that did a lot of things. So I was working in the nurses corner, and helping them with like their library and all kinds of stuff. And then we'd go and do like hospital outreaches to really remote villages. So we'd like drive through rivers and stuff to get there. It was pretty crazy. And then in Senegal, I was working with another nonprofit that does microfinance. And they were doing that in Kenya too.
Okay. So, typically those are seen as kind of white savior roles, the white woman coming in to help the African village. Was there any crime in that area? Anything that ever made you nervous?
So in Kenya, where I was living, they are the number one producer of a crop called either kat or what's the other thing that's called? Kat is what it's like commonly known for. And so it's a crop that you chew and you get high. And
Ooh.
so so they would take this cot and they would export it all over like the Middle East, Somalia, Yemen. And so the drivers would be driving from Nairobi and they would load up the trucks with all this cot and then be driving down, and we were like in the mountains, so they'd be driving down the mountains passing cars going so fast because you don't want the crop to die, so they'd like, it's like a speed against time. And so what made me the most nervous was the driving. So driving through the mountains, people passing each other going so fast, that was probably the scariest. And I remember the woman that was like my supervisor, she was like, every time you go to Nairobi, you have to let us know because we've had missionaries not come back. They were killed in a car accident. So you have to tell us like if you're planning on going. So I remember I would just like close my eyes and pray. And I'm like, oh Lord, help me get there.
So not from really any crime or mugging or violence or anything like that?
Well, my laptop was stolen. I still don't know how that happened. And then when I was walking down the streets of Mombasa, someone came up to me and ripped my necklace off of my neck, and then just kept going. It was my, like, after you live there, I'm like, that was stupid to be wearing a necklace. And it was even like kind of a nice one. So like when my parents came to visit me in Kenya, I was like, Dad, you can't have your phone on the outside of your pants. You can't be wearing a nice watch. Like you are a huge target because he's 6'5" too. I'm like, for how tall you are and just the fact that you are white, like you're gonna stand out and you are a target. Nairobi's called Nairobi for a reason. So yeah, there's a lot of crime, not necessarily just against white people. I mean, we are like a bigger target, but
I had that
for
experience
everybody.
in Brazil as well. Like, don't wear any watches or jewelry. You know, just being an American and from, you know, a quote unquote wealthy country when you're, you know, traveling to some of these areas.
And it happens everywhere too, because my friend from Kenya came to live, she came to live in America and she was robbed in Miami. So I mean, it's gonna happen anywhere, right?
No. So I was really curious about, you know, I was really latching on you being different and being looked at as different, as not the norm for that area, and just what that feels like, because, you know, for a lot of Black people, that's how we feel going into white neighborhoods or, you know, even masterminds and things like that, where we're the only or one of two, and not that we're looked at differently, but we feel different. You and I have a different experience because we're talking about different countries.
Totally. There were times where I like feared for my safety, a few. So there was one time when I was walking in Kenya in my village and this guy just came up to me and he was basically holding on to me and wouldn't let go. And he just wanted money or whatever. And so that's when I literally started praying Ephesians in the armor of God. And then my friend showed up out of nowhere and she was like, get out of here, and took care of me. And then when my dad came to visit me in Senegal, we were like, when we're walking down Plateau, which is like downtown Dakar, he's a huge target. And so there's the Bifal, which is, they're like Rastafarian dudes. They're like literally just following us and I'm like, all right, Dad, we need to walk fast and then we need to dive into this restaurant so we can kind of get out of here and like get out, and they'll probably find someone else to latch on to.
Yeah, because of your color. They're going to, you know, they have this impression that you've got money, you're rich. First of all, you can travel and be there and all of that stuff.
I really tried to like have the most authentic experience I could. So I was like, I went through couch surfing when I was in Senegal. I shared a bed with a guy I met through couch surfing. It was like a hole in the ground we used for bathing, for going number 2, that we shared with the entire apartment complex. And when my dad came to visit, I wanted him to have that experience too. So we were taking like the public transportation. So he probably wasn't too happy, but he went along with it. So I'm like, we're taking the public transportation so you can actually experience what it's like to live here. And I think that was really good for him.
Yeah. No, and I've done some experiential things like that too. So I get that. It really is good to really learn about other cultures. It gives you such gratitude and appreciation and an understanding that, you know, just because we have different cultures and traditions and ways of doing things and ways of living, we're still all people at the heart. Totally. So really segue in the last few minutes into your husband's experience in where have you lived with him in the States, and what has it been for you guys as an interracial couple?
So in the States, we lived in St. Louis for 2 years while I got my master's, and then we moved to Florida. And it's so funny, anything that he's experienced or gone through, a lot of it he hasn't shared with me because I guess he's so used to it that
You hit
it
the
like
nail
it.
right in the head. The resilience
Uh-huh.
of Black and brown people
Mm-hmm.
is so embedded and ingrained that we get almost, I don't want to say immune, but we've gathered this armor
Yeah,
around
totally.
that, it's actually normal. So why bring it up? You only really bring up
Exactly.
things that aren't normal, that are out of the norm, that are worth talking about. Otherwise, what else would you talk about if you talked about every microaggression or unconscious bias or overt aggression that you've experienced as a Black or brown person?
Totally. So a lot of it never really came up until recently with everything that was happening. And I just asked him, I was like, what's your experience been? And he would tell me, because right now where we're living is, again, suburban, nice, like upper scale, and I don't like it. I'm like, we need to get more diversity in this area. Like that's a big reason why we're leaving and going to Senegal. One of, and he would tell me how he'd just be like walking down the street and say hi to somebody and they wouldn't even say hi back. And I'm like, really? And I'm like, that just breaks my heart. I'm like, you're amazing. Why wouldn't someone acknowledge you? And that, yeah. When we were in North Central Florida, there's still Confederate flags. Like it is like a whole other world there. It is crazy. And where we ended up buying our house, we lived there for 5 years. The people that we bought the house from, we ended up actually getting to know them really well as we were going through that home buying process. And my husband said they're probably racist. And what he said is, I can control me and myself and my actions and my behavior. And hopefully I can show them a different perspective so they can see that there are good people of the same race, right? There are good people that have good hearts that are so like, he's like, I don't know what their experience has been in this area. There was a lot of segregation where we were. And I remember bringing my son to the park, and he was 4 or 5. He was like between 3 and 5. He was young, and he was playing with 2 little Black boys. And there was a white girl that came up and wanted to play with them. And the boys are like 5, 6. And the boys are like, no, we don't want to play with you. Our dad says we don't like white people. And I cried because I saw the entire thing, and I saw how my son actually, like at that age, he knew what happened and he could completely understand it. And I mean, I'm like, what happened to those boys, their parents, to make them behave in that way and to teach their children that, you know? And so that I just remember crying, and I'm like, this is not right. Like, oh.
Having been that little girl that was not allowed, I shouldn't say not allowed to play with, but whose white friends' parents would not allow me into their home and would not allow their daughters into my home. And I really remember not being able to understand it. And I actually, as a little girl, not understanding it fully, was mad at my parents. I thought they did something wrong, or, you guys would clean the house, or, just, and you hear it from other children that, their parents don't allow them and don't let them. And it's really, really confusing for children. And it really starts with the parents. And I know that there's a lot of people who want to protect their children and, because of their experience with racism, don't want their children to feel it. So how they are expressing it is really, it's just hard. It's just really, really hard to want to protect your children at the same time from the forces of racism. but sometimes that comes out all muddled and even more racist.
Yep.
You want to protect your children. There's one more thing I wanted to ask you about your relationship with your husband.
Yes.
How do you find that you are discussing issues of race more now than
Yes.
before?
Totally. We never discussed it before. It like was a non-issue. It was, you're my husband, I'm his wife. It literally was a non-issue. And until recently, now we're like, okay, now this is I want to hear more about your experience.
It just got real.
Yeah, exactly. And if anything, it's been like confirmation for us that we're making a really good decision to move to Senegal. So it's like he feels more comfortable. I know our children will probably end up being better off over there. But yeah, so I remember, I forget, something happened that like really triggered me, and I was going to write an email to send to my list and just like to help me process it. And also we had someone that was on the podcast that was talking about race relations, and I was crying and I was so upset. And he was like, you need to take a deep breath before you hit send and just revise that before. So he's like, and then I love him. And he's like, this isn't your place to get involved. And I was like, but it is my place. Like,
interesting. That's interesting because, we need white people to get involved.
exactly.
And I'm sure he's coming from a protector, and
he wants to protect me. He doesn't want me to get backlash because, of course, when you speak up about issues like this, you're going to get backlash. And I think I told him, I'm like, the worst thing I can do is say nothing and not speak up. And I have a platform where I can reach hundreds of thousands of people. So why the heck wouldn't I use my voice for good? Especially if it affects my family. Like, I would do it anyways. But like, I adore my husband, I adore my children, and I want them to live in a world where they're loved for who they are, not the color of their skin,
They feel safe.
Exactly.
I mean, the fact that white people are now being really woke and
totally
awake to what the experience has really been for their Black friends and family is powerful. And I know that, even with my husband, I know there's a part of him that wants me to be safe and feel safe and not be so hurt by some of the things that are being shared on social media that actually I do get to take personally because it affects my life mattering.
Right.
And but at the same time, I appreciate him holding space for me to do what I feel I need to do to make a difference, to have an impact.
Yep.
Because that's what it's about. And for me, we have greater impact through these intimate conversations and really getting to know each other's experiences from a place of compassion and understanding.
Totally.
And not making right or wrong and judging and all of that. It is a different experience. So, share with your husband that you'll be okay.
I'm tough. I can handle whatever hate comes my way. Like, if I'm not getting any hate, then I'm not reaching enough people and I'm not using my voice and being bold enough. So I'm okay with it.
She said, everybody. Because we've got to make these bold decisions. It's, I was thinking this morning, about Hitler and the Nazis and what happened when a lot of people saw what was going on. They saw what Hitler was doing, but they didn't speak up. Because it didn't affect them directly, or it wasn't their problem, or they were afraid of the backlash. And that silence, caused the extermination of 6 million Jews. And so, there's a lot of people who may be watching this live or watching this later who are afraid to take a stand, to draw a line in the sand and to say, this is where I stand on this issue. Because of fear of losing clients, fear of, inciting haters, fear of what their family will say, what their friends will say. I know for you, it's personal because your family is Black and brown.
Right.
Like, no joke. and their lives are directly affected by what's going on in this country. And I, like you, I'm looking for, I mean, I live in a great diverse area, don't get me wrong, but you know, I want to also live my dream and get more bang for my buck and have a bigger, nicer house for what I pay for in the Bay Area. Because you know, the Bay Area is the most expensive area in the world.
Right.
But now I'm thinking more about the diversity issue. Like,
totally. Exactly. But I want to make an important distinction, because even if my family were not directly involved, I still would be, because this isn't a color issue. It's a human issue.
It is. It is. So thank you for making that distinction. I appreciate it.
Totally. And so if we love,
yeah,
like if we love our brother and sister, it shouldn't matter what color their skin is. If we see them struggling and needing support, we should support them.
Exactly. Exactly. And just by you sharing your story, even before you met your husband, we knew that about you. So thank you for being that strong, because you were on this journey before you met the man of your dreams.
Yep.
Pretty much. And, you know, you felt your calling. And so, you know, the allyship of supporting Black lives really gets to be heavily, heavily, heavily on white and white presenting people or non-Black people, because you're going to make the difference. Your voices are going to be heard before ours. Your voices, and it takes, you know, it's all hands on deck. It takes a village. Not that we get to be silent and let you do all of the work. It really is. We each have our role.
Totally.
And so, you know, I'm finding what my role is. You're figuring out what your role is. Everybody's figuring it out. But inaction and silence is not an option if we want to really create sustainable transformational change. So
agreed.
Thank you, my dear, for coming on, for sharing your gorgeous family with us. We appreciate that. Let's see that little face again, those little chubby cheeks.
Yeah, she really wants the microphone.
I know. Well,
give
okay.
Give it to me.
You know, she's like,
use your voice. Kavishu.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm just going to end the broadcast. I'm going to thank everybody who's watching in live or seeing us on the replay. And I want to appreciate you for sharing your story, sharing your heart, sharing your intention. And I'll see everyone next week on Coffee and Conversations. Bye. Where's my mouse?